Hello, Perfect Death here, and today I'm going to be talking about Sacrifice Build. In particular, the reason why is because there is in the closed beta test a new star rune that's going to potentially give Sacrifice the ability to taunt. And said taunt is different from the normal one. It will force players to auto attack you for what looks to be about 3 seconds. So there's a video that I've found where they show this off. So you have two Divine Avengers, and this guy on the receiving end, he's actually going to receive the taunt. So when you watch, it's got about a 60% chance. So you can see right away it triggered on the first hit. His skills are now crossed out, so essentially his skills are disabled, and he is forced to auto attack this other guy. And it looks to be about something like 2 seconds, maybe 3, because these skills stay down for about what looks like 3 seconds, assuming he doesn't reapply another taunt on top of him. So there's some interesting meta shifts that can happen because of this. You don't necessarily need to be built as a sacrifice build in order to take advantage of this. So even on currently I'm on a PvE build, so not really a PvP build in this case, but usually I do stick a sacrifice around just because the skill itself can bypass quite a lot of damage reductions. It only gains some attack portions and elemental damage type later on when you go past level 5, but the bulk of the damage happens based off of the percent HP that you have. So, and you normally get 5 charges. You can get an extra from the AC rune, and then there is a rune in the rune box here, which I believe I have. I don't have it equipped on this build, but it is the Blood Sacrifice rune. Gives you more move speed, gives you more attack speed, but if you get that third line activated, gives you an extra 3, so then you can go to about 9 attacks that do a sacrifice with the buff on it. Now, meta-wise, it is a disable, basically. It allows you to stop somebody from doing things except for just auto-attacking you. So they can't run away, they can't target somebody else, they're stuck attacking you so long as you keep reapplying your sacrifice taunt. And that doesn't make it the strongest disable out there. There's disables like Space Silence, Manhole, Dark Matter Trap, Black Hole, and those ones, they are also irresistible like this, but they can be like used at range. You're not locked in auto attacks. They can just run off and do something else if they wanted to, or they have like an AoE effect, or they can remove buffs, things like that. So this one, not all that powerful in the big picture of the meta, but it does help to mitigate one of the big issues for a sacrifice build, and that's that you have to stay in melee, as if somebody is moving away, they actually, because of how online games work, you're probably going to have a desynced attack on your first attack, so the server's not going to count it, and therefore they won't receive damage, and they can often just keep walking away from you, and if they do that, you will have a very hard time doing damage to people consistently. So this at least prevents that if you wanted to main a sacrifice build, but it also lets you do some useful support where you can force somebody to, come after you instead of somebody else, or prevent people from using skills. So if you see a Chronomancer and they're going to Space Silence and remove buff me, but you can get to them first, you might be able to trigger your sacrifice taunt, and therefore they can't Space Silence spam you forever. So potentially can even the playing fields. It's definitely not going to be like a top tier ability. as for like how you might be able to fit it in, I could probably in my, because if I go to, oh, you have to go to my box, my book. If I were to go to my sacrifice build one, I could actually just swap out this Saint Chant rune as my battle chant healing. Overall, it's nice, but that taunt would just be overall better, especially since they've recently buffed Glorious Guardian to work on dying recovery. Because if I do go below 30% HP, which is when your sacrifice stops working, right? It won't actually take up any more charges because your HP is too low. Your dying recovery kicks on, and if you have Glorious Guardian AoE on the ground, it's just going to super heal you right back up. So battle chant's starting to be less useful in that regard. So I would probably be able to swap out that new sacrifice rune, assuming things don't get changed too much. Now, if I probably, as a general thing, like PvE build, I don't have Spear Quicken. I can get a pretty good attack speed just without that if I use agility foods as well. Because this is a hybrid Earth Drive build, I do have agility, so my attack speed's not the lowest. But if I were to go to my, again, I'll switch back here. If I do go back to this, I do have, it doesn't show all of the stats here, but I do have about the same amount of agility. But if I use that Spear Quicken, my attack speed's going to pretty much cap out. If I get agility B food and awakening potion, then I'll have the 480 attack speed, which is going to reapply the sacrifice a lot. So if you're looking to just build for that taunt effect, then you don't really need the highest attack speed if you want to just sustain it. Sacrifice itself, it does recharge pretty quick, though eventually you'll probably run low on SP, especially if you're fighting in 6 versus 6 where your SP regeneration is limited. And overall there, some people might end up wondering, well, we've seen the runes, some of your skills, you'd probably want your Spear Quicken. You wouldn't really need Spear Mastery just because attack doesn't really do too much for the skill itself. I do like Shield Charge because of the extra hit rate and the stun rate. You've got something like a 40% hit rate extra, and then this has like a 55% stun chance with a 3-second stun. But one of the problems with Shield Charge is it knocks people away. So in order to disable somebody with stun, which is also irresistible, which is a resistible status effect, you have to kind of push them into a corner in order to make full use of this as a disable. So that was kind of one of the things I would do before get 2 Wraith Star cards and run Shield Charge. So now it's possible to just rely on sacrifice, right? And in that case, you do want your reflex shield enough to get sacrifice, and getting this higher than 5 is also a good idea. There's some hidden extra damage bonuses that they don't show. So with this skill, you definitely want this at level 15 anyway. It does bypass everything except for refine defense of your enemy and also auto attack damage received. So there are some ways to greatly reduce the damage from sacrifice, but overall it's a pretty consistent form of damage itself. For the Royal Guard skills, I definitely would recommend getting the Command Charge skill just because that lets you go fast and prevents you from getting snared and slowed. So it's very effective there. This skill is pretty good just for the poison resistance alone, and if you don't have fear immunity, then it'll give you some extra fear resistance. Piety can be quite nice if people are going to convert your armor element, so if you get white imprisoned and they convert you to ghost element, you can actually still use skills, so you can use piety, you can force yourself to holy element instead of being ghost element, because they're going to give a rune to arcane masters that let them hit you with Tetravortex in white imprisoned state, and they're going to add some ghost element to Tetravortex, so it's going to hurt if they combo those two. As for some of these others, Prestige is pretty good for that. Auto Guard causes debuffs, and then there's a rune that allows you to apply Prestige without needing the Auto Guard to proc. Earth Drive, if you do have the Command Charge Autocast rune and you're relying on that for your Earth Drive, then you don't actually need a level 10 Earth Drive. The rune will autocast level 10 Command Charge anyway. But if you are looking to clear Hell Plants and that, you don't even need a level 10 Earth Drive anyway. You can clear Hell Plants and Land Protectors with any level of Earth Drive. And the Shield of Defense is mostly just for boosting Earth Drive damage as well. Even going above level 10 will increase Earth Drive damage, so it's not a big priority there. So one of the other things people tend to wonder if they should get is Battle Chant, and it's certainly nice to have at least a level 3 of it, just because it gives you immunity to sleep and darkness. Going over that, it is mostly useful if you have the right gear to boost the effect of Battle Chant. So I've been finding it's gradually starting to fall out of favor as a source of healing, and so you can save quite a bit of points by just leaving it at level 3. Inspiration, definitely useful for getting those stat bonuses and also an extra 100 hit. And then that lets you invest in things like Fearless for reducing, crit damage and crit rate. There's also a pretty good rune for doing that as well. This really can save teams against, rune masters. And the Spear Thrust one gives you Defense Ignore and Pen, which is good for, Earth Drive and also for Counterattack Halo. King's Guardian, of course, gives you a lot of reductions, and if you get the rune for it, you can apply this to yourself instead of just only your party. In general, I tend to prefer Prestige over King's Guardian, so I never really rolled much for getting a good rune on this. And for some of these other ones, it's, like Providence can be nice for reducing holy damage and damage against demons, but that's more PvE. Unless you're trying to, you're getting attacked by a Rune Master who converts himself to demon race. Defending Aura, not that great. It's only really ranged physical autos, and if you fight a Stellar Hunter, they're going to be doing most of their DPS through that SP damage, which bypasses this anyway. Selfless Shield, not that great. Just because you have to channel it. Even if you get the card that lets you move around, you still have to channel, so greatly limits you. Devotion is definitely a good skill. It lets you keep somebody alive. And aside from that, I'll also just mention, if you are curious, this is not the same kind of taunt as the Sacrifice taunt, so you don't have to worry about giving your opponent attack bonuses. Which was one of the things I initially thought when I heard this, because if it was auto-casting a level 1 taunt, you're going to be giving somebody 50% extra attack, and that's nuts. So, going on to the Divine Avenger. If you are going to run a Sacrifice build, you can probably run Counterattack Halo really well, since both rely a lot on having high HP. Counterattack Halo does give you extra damage when based on your health. And this is basically an AoE. You get hit by somebody, it will trigger this and it will deal damage to everybody around you. It is not affected by race, element, and size. It is considered physical damage. So physical damage increase and physical damage resistances are applied to it. It is also benefits from penetration, and it what's one of the physical defense. So you do want defense ignore if you are going to try to rely on this dealing damage. It's mostly useful when you're dealing with multiple enemies in your area. So in a one-on-one, it's not that great of a DPS skill. That's more of Sacrifice's forte. Counterattack Halo is definitely better in a GVG setting where you potentially might have 20 people around you, or at least a whole party's worth of people hanging around nearby. So then this way you can pop these off. They've been buffing this skill gradually. There was a sort of stealth buff that gave it physical defense increase adjustments. And more recently there was a buff that I mentioned about where it ticks off twice as fast. So as for some of your other ones, I mentioned Glorious Guardian because this one is recently got affected by your dying recovery, and so it's not a bad idea to invest in this skill by getting more intelligence and relying on this more for healing, just because of that dying recovery tick. It's pretty nice. And it's also not considered a buff, so if it's on the ground, Earth Field will remove it, but remove buff won't get rid of this. But you can't regenerate any more of these if you don't have Autoguard activated, so. And aside from that, there's, one of the other useful ones is, of course, Freedom Vow. If you're going to dive into an area, might as well talk about this one, because that is a big part about what Sacrifice build is. It's diving into the enemy zone and trying to do something. And a big issue that we tend to have is just getting immobilized, stone cursed, freeze, stun, all that kind of stuff. So Freedom Vow is very useful, but with the current meta, there's Space Silence, Manhole, Dark Matter Trap, things like that, which are unresistible by anything that we have. So we were kind of hoping we might get like a Freedom Vow buff that made it better against everything, but getting a disable of our own is not that bad either. Though you might be able to just pick out somebody in a group and say, hey, I want you disabled because you might disable me in return, right? So that alone makes it a pretty useful combo, because you can at least get through some of the preventative measures that they might put. They might put, ice walls, or ninjas might drop a stone curse AoE around an area, things like that. So, and as it comes down to probably the main part, which a lot of people end up asking about with Sacrifice builds, what gear would you go for a Sacrifice build? So if I look over at my PvP-ish build, again, I'm on a hybrid heal build, right? So my shield and armor, these give a good combo to improving my heal from both Glorious Guardian and also from Battle Chant, as does the Rune Boots. So these aren't the most optimal for a Sacrifice counterattack Halo build. Same with some of my other gear as well. The Ivory Lance is definitely a good option. It's extremely cheap because it's Ivory Lance. And this first bit of information here, this means it ignores 100% defense. So if somebody has 150% defense, you only need an extra 50% defense ignore there, basically. So we find in PvP, people tend to be around 200 and 250% defense ignore that you need in order to get through it all. So this at least cuts that down, so you only really need about another 100% or a little more defense ignore. So with my current build that I'm sitting on right now, I have 186. Now this build achieves that by having, the Minorous card and Desert Wolf card, plus the Abyss Cry, giving me double insight, so that's 250% defense ignores, so 100% right there. With the PvP, when I run the Ivory Lance, I generally just run a Desert Wolf card, which is, so this has 50% here. The Spear has another 100%, so right there I have 150% defense ignore. White Duke Manitou is another 15%, that can be quite nice. Other sources of defense ignore comes from your guild blessings over here, where I have another 20% here from the red cards. You can, I think, do you get any from here? I don't think so. Yeah, this is the Acer Monument. Yeah, you don't get any defense ignore from that. I do have an enchant on my Watcher's Armor for Morale 3. Getting more morale, like getting a morale enchant on your Ivory Lance, is also quite good. I've just been sticking to this one for its physical damage increase because I haven't gotten a morale enchant on it yet. And there are some other things as well that will give defense ignore. Nope, I'm in armor settings here. Let's go to the Oracle Mirror. So I'm just using Earth Axe right now, but there is, in particular, it's one of the axes here. Yeah, Chieftain's Axe. So if you get a Chieftain's Axe at, let's say, +10, and you manage to roll that +10 bonus, then you get 20% defense ignore just on your slot there. If you somehow manage to get a 15 and you manage to get the roll all the way to max, then that's like a 30% defense ignore. Another source for defense ignore would definitely be your attribute runes, as there is the armor breaking rune, which is a 12% defense ignore. And then, of course, you can also get defense ignore on some of your right side slot things. So I think it's like back, tail, and face. I can't remember all of the spots that you can get defense ignore, but it's quite possible to get to 250 defense ignore with just using like a single Desert Wolf card in your weapon. And if you're running like a sacrifice build, a simple other second slot could go for like a Meta Ant Egg card. There are, of course, MVP cards that are a lot stronger. So like the Owl Baron, or the Owl Baron card is, auto cast Lex, which can be applied to your sacrifice damage to double damage. And as for some of the other cards that you could go for, max HP cards can be pretty hard to get on the offhand. Like there's the Gorgon Snake one, which a lot of people like, but it's really hard to get that because it's a lot of HP, and Dorms love HP as well. For armor, I'm currently running the Ghost Ring card, but you can also run some of the other cards as well. I tend to juggle between, so you have the Pico Pico for HP, the Therafrog for demi-human resistance, the Dokebi makes you resist wind damage a lot, and also makes you immune to snare. Then there's the Argurup card, which is poison resistance, particularly right here, because that reduces poison time. And aside from that, you might have some other card types like Lolly Star, which I'm not too impressed by the Lolly Star, but hey, it's a thing. You can run the Ferris card for the extra HP as well for boots, though some of the boss cards are definitely better, like Moonlight Flower is probably the top tier for that one. And the reason is mostly because if you have a smoky card for your accessory slot, I don't, but if you do, then to get rid of the penalty from the level 1 hide, you can use Moonlight Flower Star, and then you can run around at normal speed while hidden, which is crazy effective because you can still be countered very easily if somebody sees you, and most people are hiding. In the recent 6v6 on Global, there was at least half. I'd say it was about half the other team had smoky cards, or at least could hide, either because of smoky card or because their class has hide. So there's a lot of hiding going on, and there's a good reason for that. If you hide, you're not getting, disabled by one of the many forms of disable out there. So, but, a pretty good card that's somewhat easy to get is like Scarecrow card, which gives you a little bit of extra max HP. But I think a lot of people try to go for the Osiris card for even more HP. As for the headgear, sometimes you can go for the resistances. You don't really need the sleeping immunity so long as you have Battle Chant going. Diverucci isn't too bad just because burn happens a lot when you fight a Slayer or an Archmage. There are some other potentially good headgear cards out there as well. For me, the one that I tend to just run as on default for PvP is, of course, the Mentalist card to give me fear immunity, so I don't have to worry about Agira Star cards. And aside from that, when it comes down to your gear overall, going for the max HP, the highest max HP, you can get quite a bit out of the headgears, right? So like face, for example, I believe it is the Maya Mask. This one can get you the most HP percentage. It's not the only one. I know some people like the Japanese Dragon Noodle, but I didn't get it to +6, so oh well. This one has 5%. This one you get from story quests, so that's not bad. That's definitely one of the good free-to-play options, at least. And let's see if I go to the head. There's some up here. I know because we're in global, we don't have the eggshell BU, which China and Southeast Asia servers have, and that's really good because it prevents gear break. For us over here in global, you might be looking at running some other ones, like if you're running a stun, this one might be nice, but this one gives you 10% more HP. There is also the Corsair, which is a Revenant boss one. Let's see, where are you, Corsair? I probably went right by it. I recently got it because it popped up on Cake Battle. It should be around here. Oh yeah, there it is. But yeah, this one, if you can get it to +10, then that's lots of bite, lots of HP. The flaming goat helmet is, gotta go back and find it again. There we go. He is 10%, no vitality bonuses. It does give you a little bit of final damage resistance if the enemy's HP is lower than yours. So this one's a gacha example. Actually got this from one of those free gacha headgear event items, so that was pretty lucky in that regard. But I haven't really used this one because I haven't gotten a good enchant on it. I've been instead using the This one from 6v6, which gives you lots of damage reduction, and that's because I just got 2 really good enchants on it. So, as for the mouth slot, let's just cover that. That should be, I mean, pipe definitely gives you the most max HP, so that's the one people tend to aim for. But if you got the Kraken treasure key, you can get a pretty nice max HP out of that, and potentially damage reduction if you can +6 it. There is also, I know there was I think it's called Dragon Velvet, and it was a mouth one that would give auto attack damage reduction, lots of it, and that's a very good counter to a sacrifice build. Just because it reduces auto attack damage, and that's a big, it's about one of the, there's only 2 sources of reducing sacrifice damage really, and that's one of them, so it's a very strong option. Now, as for what I have for back, I generally like the Snowstorm Wing, just because it gives you fight max HP and then reflects abnormal statuses, so that's a very, very nice option here, because it uses the attacker's status effect back on themselves. So if they're using a Stormy Knight, they're going to freeze unless they have enough resistances to reduce the duration, because that's about the only way you can resist a Garm or Stormy Knight freeze. And then of course you can reflect poison back to assassins, unless they're using like a Chimera Star card, or yeah, it's the Chimera Star. And for tail, I'm just using this one as an example here, but often I'll go for the Magic Defense Fairy because I +12'd it for the stun resist and magic attack resist. But there's some other options to use as well. So for the back, there's a particular build. If you have a Katana as your back item and you equip a dagger, it will allow you to do double attack, and that's about a 15% chance to do double attack, and that does apply to your sacrifice damage without using up sacrifice charges. And so if you run a dagger build, so your main weapon is a dagger, and you have the Katana, it's potentially going to give you a double damage sacrifice, which makes it one of the best burst builds for sacrifice DPS. A really good way to run that is to get the Owlbear and Star card, just for that extra double damage. And I know I've seen some where they try to inflict poison, so they have like a Chimera Star card. I think they have like a Lord of Death card as well, and then they have a tail item that's a gacha item, and that I think that inflicts weak poison onto people, but because of the Chimera Star card and the Lord of Death card, they end up getting like a big final damage bonus out of that combo. So there are definitely ways to build and optimize a counterattack, or not a counterattack, a sacrifice build. If you want to go that way, definitely the dagger is probably the best option. And if you are looking to just do a combo of different types, spear is definitely the most versatile though. Now there is, of course, your Holy Avenger, which it reduces the damage you receive from sacrifice, and it has some splash AoE to it, but overall it's not really that great, just because it doesn't get you can't use Spear Quicken to make it really fast. Daggers also have a naturally higher attack speed modifier than swords and spears, so it's a bit harder to get a sword to top attack speed, and it also doesn't have that double attack bonus, so it doesn't have the burst. Now the new rune does make it so you can do some life steal when you do sacrifice damage. So that might even make it less needed to have reduced sacrifice recoil, because you're also having life steal. So I guess we'll have to see how that goes, because hey, maybe this isn't, if I know Holy Avenger's pretty expensive too, so meanwhile if you just compare it to not you Longhorn, to the Ivory Lance is just so much cheaper. If I reselect him, a plus 10 Ivory Lance, 12 million, whereas a broken plus 5 Holy Avenger is 21 million. So that's a big price difference. And I think that's about all I can think of coming up with for now. Take care.